Would be
All right,
perfect.
so we just asked that you introduce yourself and then off you go.
Perfect. Sam, could you provide me some hosting capabilities so I can share some pretty pictures of golf courses?
You may be able to share already, Adam. Does it?
Okay.
Do you have the share screen at the bottom? I think we set by default.
Yep, I got it. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Everyone sees the PowerPoint all right there? Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you all for popping in here on a Friday afternoon. I'm Adam Pfleegor. I'm an associate professor of sport administration at Belmont. And I've become really familiar with both Sam and Gabriella through our association with IAPS, or International Association of Philosophy of Sport, which many of you are familiar with. So I'm really excited about the conference. Obviously disappointed that we can't all be there in person, but at least we get to share some of the things that we're working on. But so what I'm going to talk today about is golf. If you are not a huge golf fan, I hope that I have some information at least that is interesting to you. If you are a huge golf fan, I tend to nerd out and geek out a little bit about it, and you can join me in that. This is the start of kind of a large scale project that I'm putting together with a few different faculty kind of across the country with different expertise. And what we're looking at is basically golf course design and architecture, but through a variety of different lenses, okay? And this came to light recently with the USGA, which is the governing body of golf in the United States, and Royal and Ancient, or R&A, which is the governing body of golf mainly in Europe, but basically the rest of the world. So in traditional US fashion, they do everything separate. That came out and said, golfers are hitting the ball too far, and we need to do something about it. And one of the big things or recommendations that a lot of clubs have made is, why don't we just make the golf courses bigger? Right? Let's use more land. Let's lengthen the golf courses. Technology is too good. The game is too easy. And for those of you who play, you know that golf is not too easy. It is easy for a few people. So that got me thinking, like, what does golf course architecture do specifically with conservation? So I'm going to talk a lot about some examples of two kind of diametrically opposed philosophies of golf course architecture. First, with Pete Dye as well as Corin Crenshaw, which are their companies are kind of in the most demand right now for creating courses across the globe, and what impact that has on the environment, land use, water use, and ultimately wildlife, flora and fauna. Okay, so like I said, kind of at the start of this project, would love to hear questions and anything you have or information to point along at the end as well. So hopefully we'll have some time to have a little bit of a discussion. But all right, so golf and conservation. The state of golf in 2021. I'll start off with how everyone starts off. The state of whatever. The state of golf in 2021 is strong. Okay, and what I mean by that is the pandemic, while devastating to a lot of segments of the economy, almost single-handedly saved the game of golf in the United States and in a few other places across the globe. And between 2019 and 2020, there was an increase of rounds played globally by 14%. And this is pretty dramatic to begin with, also considering that most courses were shut down for a minimum of 4 to 5 months due to pandemic restrictions. So you saw a massive increase, even though we had a decrease in the number of playing months. So far in 2021, we've seen an increase even over 2020 of 21 to 23%, depending on what we look at. So this has resulted in the most number of rounds being played. So just in the United States, in 2020, we saw 502 million rounds played, which was more than 61 million increase from the year before, which is the largest or the second largest gain in history. The first largest gain came in 1997. For those of you who are golf fans, the gain in 1997 was due to one individual, and his name is Tiger Woods. So Tiger Woods went on this massive run in 1997 at the peak of his career, and everyone started to play golf, started reaching different communities in the United States, specifically communities of color. We started to see this increase. So what all this has brought to light is an increased focus on golf, an increased focus on the game, the technology involved in the game, courses, course design, land use, and so on. So what I want to talk about, and hopefully this all connects at the end for everyone, is we're going to talk about course architecture, like I mentioned, cases of Pete Dye and Corin Crenshaw, the Distance Insight Report, which talks about club and golf ball technology. And with those combined, what this has done is increase the footprint of golf courses, and then that impact ultimately on conservation. And we'll talk about some best practices recommended by a few agencies, as well as a few that I've put together for architecture. All right, so a tale of two architects. And let me start off by saying this. I'm going to be pretty harsh on Pete Dye for the next couple minutes. And it's not because he makes really difficult golf courses, and I do very poorly there. It is because of his philosophy. He is widely regarded, however, along with his wife Alice, who has co-designed a few of the courses, a few of his most famous courses, as one of the greatest golf architects of all time. And he also has had he also has a new company that is being run by his family that charges the highest fees for golf course architecture. So they are in the most demand. So I will be a little harsh on some of Pete Dye's work, but regardless, we know that he was a special talent, but the way he went about using that is not always great, especially for the environment. And then we have Bill Court and Ben Crenshaw. Corin Crenshaw are a more recent and considered widely modern golf course architecture design teams. And you can see some of their most famous courses here. So Pete Dye with Whistling Straits, the Ocean Course at Kiowa Island, TPC Sawgrass, and the river at Black Wolf Run. The picture at the bottom here that you're seeing is TPC Sawgrass, which has a very famous island green for the 17th hole. So he always likes to put a nice little par 3 on the 17th hole. And then we have Bill Corin and Ben Crenshaw, who some of their famous courses you might be familiar with are Sand Hills in Nebraska, Cabot Cliffs in Nova Scotia, which is the photo in the top right of your screen there. Old Sandwich, which is a phenomenal name for a golf course. Abandoned Trails and Sheep Ranch out in Oregon, Sand Valley, and then Stream Song Red. So I want to talk a little bit about their course philosophy and why this matters. If you hear that sound, I keep on trying to hit my arrow, but apparently I just have to click. Pete Dye designs his course philosophies with this one statement in mind, which I think is wonderful. The brain is the weakest club in the bag. Okay. And so what he does is he utilizes an immense amount of land movement to intimidate the golfer, specifically off the tee. He wants his courses to visually intimidate you. He wants you to be scared to tee off hole to hole, okay? Some of the actual features that he uses to accomplish this, he uses a lot of wooden railroad ties. He lines bunkers. So if you've ever seen any of those on courses, TPC Sawgrass has a lot of them. A large number of bunkers. Oh, back to the wooden railroad ties. I'll talk about this a little bit while longer. But for those of you who do landscaping at home, hopefully you have looked up about the potential risks of using railroad ties and the amount of chemicals that can leach into the environment. And he lines most of his sand traps with them. A large number of bunkers. So for example, one of his most famous courses, Whistling Straits, has 994 sand bunkers on the course. Long fairway bunkers combined with deep pot style bunkers. So really small, like 2 to 3 foot radius bunkers that are really deep. And then he also has bunkers that he installs the entire length running of holes. Island greens and really intimidating par 3 shots, what he calls snakes or double dog leg par 5s. But the actual construction, he puts in a lot of unnatural terrain, right? So he puts hills where there are no hills, he puts sand where there's no sand, and he puts water where there's no water. And in order to do this, he uses an incredible amount of land movement. So going back to the Straits course, which is probably his most famous construction, he has 994 bunkers. The complex is on 560 acres of lakeside property on Lake Michigan. And in order to construct this, he had to bring in an 800,000 cubic yards of dirt. Okay. So instead of utilizing the natural resources that were available there, they had to truck in 800,000 cubic yards of dirt, which, you know, I don't think any of you are in construction, but that is a lot of dirt in order to bring in. Some of the other kind of interesting things here for TPC Sawgrass, it was a full tree covered swamp for the most part, where he decided to put his course in Florida. In order to construct the golf course TPC, he had to drain the land. So essentially he drained the wetlands. And in order to do that, it was draining of approximately 417 acres, which caused a massive displacement of local rattlesnakes. Okay. So they had an interesting kind of rattlesnake population situation there. He talks about in one of his books when they are working, trying to figure out the routing, the foresting or the forest that was sitting above these wetlands, a really strange and just unique piece of property in Northeast Florida. They had to use machetes as they were walking through to cut through all the forest. And in order to include the water, they basically, or in order to, they ran out of money for sand, so they kept on having to dig down deeper and deeper. When they were digging down deeper, this created water flow issues. So the water was flowing into ponds that weren't originally there, and so on. So there, again, a massive displacement of land, which creates some issues that we'll talk about later on. Here are a few photos of his famous courses here. So you can see this very, very natural looking island green here on the left-hand side. And then the bottom right, this is Whistling Straits. And all of this land movement, these are not natural dunes. This is part of that 800,000 cubic yards of dirt that was trucked in. And then if we move on to talk about Core and Crenshaw, their philosophy comes from what they call meandering and open-minded golf. Okay, and if you've ever played Core and Crenshaw course, a few of my friends have played them and call them boring. I think they're the most magnificent pieces of architecture imaginable. And what they have done is they try to be representative of golden age of architecture, a la Don Ross, who famously has designed Pinehurst No. 2 and some of the Pinehurst courses. What they do is they design around a signature element. So they go to a piece of property, they look at what is the signature landform element of that property, and then design around that feature. Very minimal land movement and shaping. So like I talked about with the 800,000 cubic yards, they have several pieces of property and golf courses that they have moved less than 50,000 cubic yards. And that is kind of one of their goals. The land guides the design. They don't have like signature elements like double dog leg par 3 or par 5s or island greens, things like that. They build courses integral to the landscape and the community. You will very rarely see homes surrounding Core and Crenshaw architecture. And they talk about utilizing the flow and rhythm in regards to elevation, drainage, and soil conditions. And by utilizing this kind of flow and rhythm of the land, they're able to minimize the amount of irrigation required for their courses. They don't have to reroute any of the streams or waterways, which happened. So for example, Pete Dye, one of his most famous courses is River of Black Wolf Run, where he had to reroute a significant portion of the Sheboygan River in order to get his course to fit into that area, rather than fitting the course around the Sheboygan River. So a couple facts to kind of go along this. Stream Song Red, which is their course down in Florida, rather than utilizing wetlands, he built the course entirely on a reclaimed mining land that was abandoned. For his sheep ranch course, it was built on a basically abandoned parcel of land that used to be 13 holes of golf. They fit 18 holes of championship golf onto the parcel that was originally 13 holes without rerouting any of the land movement and so on, other than a few greens. And they did this by using the natural kind of pits that were left behind, as well as not adding any sand or bunkers to the course, utilizing greens, double greens. So a green would have two flag sticks playing one hole in one direction, one in the other, and so on. And just to kind of give you an example, like I mentioned, with 560 acres lakeside for the straights course, Bandon Dunes, which is which two of the Core and Crenshaw courses are, fit 5 courses plus a par 3 course, so 5.5 courses on under 1,200 acres. Okay, so a much smaller environmental impact here that we're talking about. The other is the size and distance of the courses. The Core and Crenshaw courses are topping out at between 62 and 6,400 yards. Whereas Pete Dye courses tend to be high 7,000s, including the longest course in America, which is the Pete Dye course at French Lick in Indiana, which plays 8,102 yards from the tip. So our friend Sam Morris here hits a hell of a drive, a really long drive, but I think 8,102 yards is even out of his range there. So he's shaking his head here. So a couple of examples here, and if you can notice about the land movement here with these courses, is significantly different than the photos that you saw earlier with Pete Dye, right? Okay, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to jump ahead. So I actually talk about animals and conservation instead of just golf courses. USGA, this is what I was talking about with distance. It's gone up a lot. Okay. It's 264 yards compared to 304. I also think it's really, really interesting. They did a study. The average male golfer claims they drive the ball over 265 yards. When in fact, the average male golfing amateur distance is 216 yards. Increase of about 1% every 4 years. So what they did is instead of trying to make the courses bigger, they want to make some changes to the equipment, which you can see there. Here's the course length that I talked about. In the golden era, 5,400 yards, the 90th percentile was 61, approximately 100 acres used for land, significant variability in that. Now we're looking at the average course length, 6,900 yards, 7,300 for the 90th percentile. Major venues play at 75 to 8,000 with approximately 300 acres used. So environmental and wildlife impacts. A lot of this I've been working through with the Audubon International Society. They have a few different programs which are really fascinating. And also the USGA and RNA have come out with their own environmental impact programs. So some concerns for golf courses. Pollution of ground and surface water, poor stormwater quality to eroding shorelines, especially when you use 560 acres along a lake. Degradation and loss of natural areas, hazardous chemicals, massive use of water for irrigation. Right. So, oh my gosh, I marked it down. The average golf course with irrigation uses 312,000 gallons of water a day to irrigate their water. damaging wetlands, loss and fragmentation of wildlife habitats, and then also increased conflicts between golfers and wildlife as we overtake habitat. So some positive impacts or ways that the Audubon Society says, I'll answer, I got your question. Thank you. I'll answer in 1 second. I want to pop through this. Audubon Society says we can minimize this impact and work to preserve the environment and wildlife, provide needed wildlife sanctuaries, and I'll share 2 examples coming up. Preserve natural areas, support native plants and wildlife. So instead of bringing in 800,000 cubic yards, you use the natural soil and land there, even if you have to minimally move some of it around. Protection of water resources, filter stormwater through coarse and wetlands, turf grass, rehabilitate the degraded landscapes, for example, utilizing a stripped mining site in Florida for a golf course, improve air quality, and then also provide education for golfers on natural habitats and how not to leave the golfing area, because you could have an impact. So some of the programs that they've put together, and here's just a few examples, are the BioBlitz, the Monarchs in the Rough, and the Raptor Relocation Network. The BioBlitz is an educational process where they work with young golfers on how to be environmentally and how to be environmentally conscious when making golfing decisions. The Monarchs in the Rough is a program that sets up monarch butterfly sanctuaries within golf courses. One of our golf courses here in Nashville has a Monarch in the Rough sanctuary, and it is really phenomenal. It's a really neat thing to look at. And then the Raptor Relocation Program. This actually got started with teaming up, the USGA teaming up with Audubon and some airports. So raptors were increasingly coming in on airports and causing conflicts with themselves or issues for themselves and also the airplanes. So they came up with a Raptor Relocation Program to build as natural as possible habitats for these raptors along golf courses. So they are relocating them from urban airport areas, specifically the New York area and the San Francisco area airports, to golf courses there. So some best practices for golf courses and talking about conservation and sorry about that. Anyway, best practices for golf courses. So minimize the footprint, overall acreage and turf grass, utilize minimal rough areas. So a lot of the Golden Area courses had no rough. It was the fairway, and then it would run into a natural area. This not only limits the destruction of wildlife habitat, but it also significantly limits the amount of grass that you have to keep alive, right? So for example, Pinehurst number 2 has an area of only 61 acres of turf grass that has to be irrigated, watered, and so on. Limit the land movement and unnatural flora. Encourage or require walking with the use of only electric carts. And if carts are required, keep them on the path so there's no continued destruction of wildlife areas. Collection of rainwater for limited irrigation. Okay, the courses in Arizona have put this into place where they're utilizing only rainwater allowed for irrigation. Employ habitat, animal, environmental experts during the design phase. I think this is a critical one, and one that Core and Crenshaw have done in their most recent project, where they brought in habitat experts to see how that they can design and manipulate the land without destroying any habitats. Limited or no housing development around the courses, and then the protection of coasts and shorelines, specifically with land movement. And this has become increasingly an issue for low-lying courses. So for example, the Ocean Course at Kiowa, which has it is at sea level. So yeah, so I apologize, I had to run really quickly through that. I talked too much about some of the stuff at the beginning, but like I said, it's a really exciting project. I think there's a lot of different elements. I'm going to dive into things like, fair play and how that's going to work with maybe making the game too easy, and the environmental concerns and some of the habitat with the wildlife concerns and so on. So I appreciate you all listening and happy to answer some questions here.
Adam, I had to track with my and tracking app, I'm only averaging 271 yards a drive presently. So I have,
Okay,
a,
well,
I have
that's
a new driver this year.
yeah, that's only like 40 more than me, so it's okay.
It's really not the point though, because you score far
Yeah.
better than I do. Let's have some real questions rather than golf banter.
Yeah.
Jan, go ahead.
Is it actually necessary to have long golf courses? Because, I mean, are long courses necessarily better than shorter ones? Because it's not just about the amount of distance that you can whack the ball up to, is it? I don't know anything about golfing for.
Yeah, so really important question. Where I fall is I think that by significantly lengthening the golf course and not limiting some of the technology that is currently in place for professional golfers, what you're doing is potentially minimizing the skill required to play the game. So you may only have to use a driver wedge to get into, for example, a par 4, where previously the golf technology required you to use a bunch of significantly more clubs. The other thing is what this does, all of these are completely interconnected, which is why I think talking about golf technology is important when talking about golf conservation, because this technology in our advanced play and increasing distance has required increase of acreage and increased deforestation and destruction of animal habitat and so on. And so all of this has massive consequences, and it also has a consequence of limiting the number of clubs required to be successful and post a successful score on the golf course. So my answer is no, I do not think long courses are better than short courses. I think that there is a place for a variety of different courses, but the answer to me is not lengthening it. Pete Dye Associates have also talked about just adding more sand traps. Maybe that could help, steer players around it and so on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions from others? Just about a minute or more.
Adam, there are a couple in the chat box. Mike asked what causes water pollution.
Yeah, so on courses, from what I've been reading through the Audubon National Society, it is the lack of regulation over the chemicals used to basically keep your course green. And it varies state to state to some extent. There is some national regulation, but there also has not been enforcement of that. And so you're seeing a use of harmful chemicals, which then goes into the runoff. Some of the Audubon Society's recommendations are the use of they're basically an elimination of the use of chemicals and being able to play more on that natural environment. So if you have ever played on a Corin Crenshaw course, it's not like hitting off of a mat. There's maybe some dead spots in the fairways. There are some things going on there that might not look pretty and pristine, but they're about the preservation of natural environment as well.
Fun stuff, Adam, and a different take on that. Yeah.
And Sam mentioned, yes, some courses, especially during the winter, use paint to paint it green, especially the greens, so that you can differentiate between the green and the fairway.
Yeah. I know that golf balls also have a certain decay. So when you have enough, like an oceanside course, golf balls will cluster in certain areas in the water, and that can cause all kinds of ecological issues. But mostly, honestly, mostly my golf balls.
Yeah.
Few of them belong to Adam.
That's right.
We are out of time. Thanks, Adam. Interesting stuff, this sort of confluence of human sports and the way they are impacting ecology. Thanks, man.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your conference here and a nice weekend, y'all.
Take care. Thanks again.
Thank you.